Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me on this my journey into the constraints-led approach for BJJ slash ecological dynamics, etc., etc., coaching in general. I am here in lovely Bali. I'm enjoying myself a nice little bintang. I've had a few inquiries, let's say, around a statement I made that I reckon that CLA is actually the best outcome for Enactivism, active inference, and ecological dynamics. Look, I am not saying I'm an expert in any of these fucking fields, so please don't be hitting me up for like, oh, you think you're the fucking master. I'm not. Clearly I'm not. Alright? I'm a fucking digital marketer that is super interested in coaching and super interested in ecological dynamics and has gone down this mad rabbit hole of ecological psychology and activism and active inference and how does all perception and physiology and fucking psychology and all of this just fucking collapse together, and this is what I'm interested in. So what you're seeing is me trying to decipher this. All right. So anyway, and a lot of this came from my questioning came from trying to understand how I can get my knowledge about more efficiently downloaded into someone else's knowledge of, and how that works. Yeah. And part of that question was that there's this cognition aspect, like, because I know that there is like the perception action coupling, there's that loop, but where does cognition come into it? Because there's something there, and it's there somewhere, but like it's on the outer. Is it on the inner? Is it on somewhere in the path? Fucked if I know. All right. So let's just quickly break it down. So, Enactivism, cognition and perception are the organism creating its world. So, cognition emerges from what you do to the environment, is how I understand it, from self-organizing, right? Active inference it's kind of like prediction modeling. It has a Bayesian framework, but rather than like the computational thing of like, I have a framework and I see the environment and the environment is giving me something, and then I have to compute that environment through a framework that I have in my brain, and then like put it into play. It doesn't really do that. Like in active inference, we are a predictive computational model. And from what I understand, it is unifying a number of models, like the Enactivism and ecological dynamics models, in that it allows you to have internal models, internal mental models, but that you are predicting based off those internal models. Fuck! Okay, so we're back. So, in activism, you learn by teaching, reflecting, and then adapting, right? So, and from my perspective, this is why I felt like my fastest gains under the traditional methods were when I was being a purple belt as a beginner teacher, what I used to call myself as a beginner coach, right? Because I kind of knew what I was doing, and then I was trying to explain to people what was going on. And I think Enactivism, like, that's where the Enactivism sort of model works, but then you have to know what is actually happening in the pattern, right? So, like, I could tell you the techniques that needed to happen, but then it was like, okay, well, I need to put myself in that situation a number of times in order to execute that pattern of techniques. And it's actually one of the, I think this is a point that occurred to me early on, which was like, I wanted, when I used to have the guys write down what the fuck was going on, right? Literally write it down, because the visualization aspect of it was like, okay, can you visualize it? Can you predict what was going on, right? Not predict, but can you take what you're feeling and and write it down and make it a conceptual thing from your perspective? I didn't even give a fuck what they said. I literally did not give a fuck what they said when I asked about, okay, what was your, what was your biggest takeaway? And I don't care where you got it in the lesson. And I still ask this. I actually ask this in it at the end of every class. I say, what was your biggest takeaway from today? And I don't care. I literally say this. I don't care where you got it. Whether it was from the lesson, from rolling, from fucking, you just had a light bulb when you were going to the toilet. I don't care where you got it. What was your biggest lesson? So I think people, and in the intervals that I have after a CLA game or a task-based game, having them think about what they're doing and explain to the class, what they felt, and explain. It's interesting when you ask this stuff. They'll say, when I was doing it to you, I could do this, but when I was doing it to you, I couldn't do this. And that's where I think the enactivism part comes in. The active inference, I'm not sure if I use this as much, but it's like, I get people to sort of say, okay, so where would you go to now? Like, so what would you do? Like, you're saying, I couldn't do anything from here. Okay, what would you do from there? I don't think I'm as, I suppose, onto it with active inference as an activism, but part of the reason being is because what ends up happening, and this has happened in class, right, is I'll say something like, okay, so, well, what could you do? And you get like these, well, and it ends up being like they just go off on tangents, right? So it's like, oh yeah, but I could potentially do this, and and I mean, look, it might be that I just don't understand what their concept of what their predictions are going to be are going to end up being. But I tend to think that there's too much navel gazing going on, where they're like, oh, I think that I could do this, and then it's like, yeah, but I don't know. Maybe it just gets in because they're not that advanced. They don't see that all right, you take that path, I'm going to shut that down. But I think with CLA, you could go, okay, let's test that theory. All right, so if you think that's going to happen, well, let's test it. And then let's see if that works. I think when I do CLA, I try and give like the opportunity for 2 to 3 outcomes, depending on where we are in the sequence of events. And if you give 2 to 3 outcomes, 2 to 3 tasks as the goals, then what you tend to see is like a really balanced attempt at these 3 things, or at least 2 things. And so the prediction modeling stuff, I'm not sure if it's too in the brain. It doesn't happen like. So I'm not sure if I'm 100% on board with active inference, but maybe I just don't understand it. Don't understand it that much. And I'm kind of talking through this, but I've written a whole bunch of notes. I've got it's in my notes. I say it's less lived, so it wants to create transferable, idealized models. So in that sense, from my notes, it says it's better to create coaches. But it's like, how do I get that knowledge of into them if they don't have the knowledge about? So here's my examples. CLA example: Enactivism. Potentially do a constraints-led approach game, then get the students to work through what they did and how it felt, which is kind of how I feel like I'm doing it now. It's maybe not to the extent that, I would say I'm 90% CLA, and then I give that 10% to what they did and what they felt. Whereas Enactivism would probably say give more to that section. Active inference would be, I don't know, like I would say do a CLA up front, but then get students to predict what's going to happen, what I'm going to. I think that's where I think that active inference works, is that if I say, okay, we've done this game, where do you think we can go from here? Based on what you've felt. And I think that's where active inference is CLA compatible, but it's a key difference. And then you reflect on, did that thing that you wanted to do happen? Fuck. I think CLA, I think the limitation is, and this is what I've written here, but it really stands out, is like everyone says, you're forgetting, the thousands of years that it took to get to this with technique. And I'm like, no, it's not. Like, I'm just trying to figure out a better pedagogy or andragogy, which is a new term that I fucking found out. Pedagogy is teaching kids. Andragogy is teaching adults. How do I teach in a way that proves to people, not necessarily because, a better mechanism of delivery is still a better mechanism for delivery, but how do I prove to people that I stand on the shoulders of the giants that come before me? How do I do that? Because right now I'm not able to do that because I'm just showing games, even though I am still standing on the giants of people that come before me. I think, as a summary, Enactivism is more reflection. Active Inference is saying, what did you expect and what happened, and what did you do about what happened. Hopefully that helps. I don't know if it did. I'm still working through this stuff, guys. I really am. Yeah, anyway, much love. Peace.